afternoon and welcome to the Career Week event for Wednesday, a book publishing talk with Dr. Maurice Dorsey. My name is Anna DeCecchi-Qualls and I'm the Director of External and Alumni Relations for the Graduate School. We're excited that you're able to join us for today's program, Book Publishing with Maurice Dorsey. I know many of you are giving up your lunch hours or other times to be with us, and we're incredibly grateful. This webinar is brought to you by the Graduate School in partnership with the Alumni Association's inaugural Career Week. It's a big deal. A week-long virtual series to help alumni like you and students to explore and advance careers. At this time, I'd like to ask everyone to mute themselves until the Q&A part of this program. And we will begin more formally our program of events. We have a lot to talk about today. Maurice will talk about his life and process for a bit, and then we will have time for Q&A. He will talk for 30 minutes, and then we will have 30 minutes for conversation. We will take questions at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to submit any questions in the chat box located at the bottom of the Zoom panel. In the meantime, I will be monitoring that. This webinar is being recorded, and by participating, you acknowledge and consent to your image, likeness, or voice being recorded. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Maurice. Maurice W. Dorsey graduated as the only African-American in his class at the Bel Air Senior High School in Bel Air, Maryland in 1965. He earned a bachelor's degree in Family and Consumer Sciences from the University of Maryland in 1970, then earned a master's degree in liberal arts from the Johns Hopkins University in 1975. He earned a second master's degree of education from Loyola College of Maryland, and then returned to the University of Maryland to earn a Ph.D. in education in 1985. He has worked in both public and private sectors, finding his career in secondary education, higher education, and government. Maurice is a life member of the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity and Phi Delta Kappa. He retired from the United States Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture in 2012. And since then, he's been extremely busy, and he has written 3 books, Businessman First, From Whence We Come, and his most recent, Of Time and Spirit. And now we will get started, and I will ask Maurice a few questions, and we will keep to the 30 minutes. So Maurice, first of all, I'm incredibly honored and grateful that you're here. We've known each other for a while, and my first interaction with Maurice was a result of a story and an interview that, that I wrote about him and his journey to the University of Maryland's doctoral program. So I'm incredibly pleased that you could be with us today. My first question to you is, please give us a brief overview of your journey to UMD and some of your experiences as a person of color in the late 1970s, early 80s in a doctoral program here.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here, and I appreciate your hospitality and that of the University of Maryland at College Park. I entered the University of Maryland in undergraduate school in 1965 upon graduation from the Bel Air Senior High School in Bel Air, Maryland. I was the only African-American in my class of 460 seniors, and this was during the time of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And coming to Maryland was a big deal to me. I mean, the campus was so huge. We had approximately 30,000 students at that time. That included the commuter population. I did live on campus, but at that time in American history, I ended up having a single room because I wasn't really welcomed as a person of color in the dormitories with other men. So, and that was before coeducational dormitories. But of the 3 institutions that I have attended in my life for education and higher education, University of Maryland, where I learned the most. I felt like I got more education from Maryland But it wasn't because of favoritism. I was somewhat unknown. And when I lived in the small rural county in Bel Air, Maryland, I was somewhat known because my parents were urban and my parents were fully engaged in the community and the PTA and the scholarship committees at the schools, and they were actively involved. And so I had name recognition. At College Park, I did not have that. And so it was a little bit of a struggle for me academically adjusting to a very small town, coming to a very large campus. And it was my very first time living away from home on my own and trying to manage a tiny allowance that my parents sent to me every 2 weeks. And it came just as regularly as a government check. My parents were very, very good about that. And I was very fortunate to find that my parents paid for my full tuition. I had no scholarships. When I came on to graduate school, when I returned to do graduate studies, I was working full-time in Washington, D.C., and commuting back and forth between Baltimore and College Park to go to campus for Monday, Wednesday, and Friday classes, or Tuesday and Thursday. So the social life, again, was sort of limited because I was on campus and off campus. I didn't have the residency experience that I had living on campus in undergraduate school, which satisfied me okay because I was very familiar with the campus and the library and how to get along.
My second question is, you've published 3 books: Businessman First, Life of Henry Parks, a Black Baltimore businessman; From Whence We Come, about an African-American gay man; and lastly, Of Time and Spirit, about your father. It seems as though you have been drawing from your own experiences as a Black gay man living and growing up in Maryland. Is this generally true? Can you say more about each book and how they came to be?
Yes, I think the overriding theme of all 3 of my books is for individuals to learn to overcome adversity. When I wrote the book about Henry Parks, he was a personal friend of mine. He owned the Park Sausage Company in Baltimore, Maryland. And I don't know if any of the listeners or viewers were aware of the Park Sausage Company because it existed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and the late 80s. But they had a very notable East Coast banner of "More Park Sausages, Mom, more Park Sausages, please." And he and I were friends, and it was a 30-year difference in his age and in my age. And we became really very close friends, and he mentored me in many ways. One of the things that I felt that was outstanding about this gentleman is that he was the first African-American man to ever issue stock publicly on the New York Stock Exchange, which was quite unusual and a huge achievement. And he had come from a very poor background. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia, but his family moved to Dayton, Ohio, above the Mason-Dixon line, and part of his adversity was race. When I wrote my second book, From Whence We Come, that is a true story. It's a novel based off of a true story. And I feel as a writer, and I also felt as an educator in my career, and as a human being in general, we often get caught up in institutions. I was born Catholic, so you have the rituals of the Catholic Church. You live in a Black community, you go to a Black school, you go to an integrated school. And I think sometimes when we get caught up in institutions, we forget ourselves. We forget who we are and how we fit into that. And I think it creates a lot of problems in us functioning in the world. In my case, I was gay, and I was Black, and I was Catholic, and I lived in a rural environment, and I wasn't wealthy either. And I think some people go to the place of being the victim, and the book is to show how you can achieve. So in those first 2 books, it was overcoming the adversities of the environments and institutions of which we are a part. Now, when I wrote my third book, Of Time and Spirit, which is a tribute to my dad, but it's also true stories because I'm telling my story and my relationship with my dad. And he too lived a life of poverty. In some instances, he was Catholic, and there were a number of children in the family. At Christmas time, it may have been just a pair of gloves or something like that, and a piece of candy and a piece of fruit. So in all three protagonists of my book, all of them struggled with some type of difficulty or adversity, but in spite of that, they still overcame, they achieved, they participated in the bigger society and made contributions on a higher level than which they came. And so they were not lost in the cracks. They made the preparation and they did the work, and they were able to succeed. And yes, the setting is all in Maryland, and I am drawing off of my life experiences because I think for any future writing that I do, it helps me become authentic in terms of myself, in terms of my person, where my values are, and sort of outlines my life. But it also helps me to be a better writer and more clear about what I'm putting down on paper and pencil.
Thank you, Maurice. My next question is, did you want each book to stand on its own, or are you trying to build a body of work with connections between each book?
Well, I can't say that I think originally I wanted them to more or less stand on their own. But as you pointed out earlier, I mean, the setting of all of the books are the state of Maryland. There's some relationship to Baltimore City and Washington, D.C., because Washington, D.C. was my mother's home. I think there's some diverse characters within the book, and across the books, I talk about my life and my lifestyle. But I think the one with my dad was inspired because my dad bought a computer before he died in the mid to late 90s, and it was his intention to write his own story. I had no plans of writing his book, but when he died in 2000 at the age of 81, and my mother and I were cleaning out the family house, she just said to get rid of all of these papers and all of this junk. And I couldn't quite part with my dad's materials, so I just took them and brought them home to my home. And then I subsequently aggregated it and wrote the book. It was the same more or less with Henry Parks. Henry Parks, when he died of Parkinson's disease, he said to me, "Maurice, I need 15 more years." Well, it was 30 years difference between his age and my age. What did I know about writing a book? But I told him, I said, just to comfort him, "Don't worry, Henry, I'll write a book about you and you will live forever." So we started the project, but he passed away before the project was done. So I had to do some research on all of them. I did the most research on my dad's book, but they all kind of stand alone, but they also have a relationship to each other. And part of that is me in my person, and part of it is me with them.
Thank you. What is your writing process like, and how much research did you do for each book, which you already answered, but what is your process like in terms of laying out your plans and timetables and, just kind of the logistics of how you think about, finishing this from A to Z?
Yes, well, I started as a neophyte. I had no idea as to where I was going. I did take some classes at the Writers Center in Bethesda, Maryland. I think I took 2 8-week courses in writing biographies and nonfiction writing. I didn't necessarily find those to be as helpful to me as I thought that they would be. I've discovered that writing is more or less an art. And I think if you are a reader, you find particular genres of books that you like and particular authors that you enjoy reading. one of my favorite authors is Augustin Burroughs. He was the author of Running with Scissors, Dry, and about 6 or 8 other books. And what I liked about his writing style was just that he was just so authentic. He just put everything out on the table. There were no bars, no barriers. And I wanted to just release myself into my book. So that's what I did. So I took the writing classes, but I also bought some books from the Kramer bookstore here in Washington, D.C., on how to write a biography, how to write a novel. And I found the reading of those books a little bit boring. It's almost like a textbook style thing. So I decided to just go with my own style and just to use the information that I had gathered from the Writing Center and the books that I had read. And you just get behind your computer and you just start typing. And I put in, a dedication and a purpose and a table of contents to give myself some structure. I did not outline it like some people, some writers had suggested that you outline your book. And that would have been an English composition type of thing from my English classes at Maryland and Hopkins. But I just sort of went freelance and organized it, not necessarily sequentially, like From Time and Spirit. I started my dad's book with his funeral. I didn't start the book chronologically at his birth, which is recommended for some biography type books. With Henry's book, I started with his business, the success of his business, and then I wrote about the toils that he went through to get the business launched and to become a multimillionaire. So I think I probably had a more unorthodox process of getting the books on paper. One of the things that I think is really very helpful is to have a good editor. And an editor is very important. And so when I submitted my book to the editor, it certainly came back a lot better than what I had written. But then when I read it after it had been edited, I still saw some things and some errors that also could have been corrected. So my process, I think, was a little unorthodox, but it was very creative. I'm very happy with each of the books. And I plan to write a 4th book and maybe a 5th book. So I don't know how much life I have at 73 years old that I'm going to have time to write all of this stuff that I'm creating in my head, but I do think it's good information. And I think as an African-American writer and author, it's very important because we don't tell our stories. And I think some stories need to have a happy ending, but all stories don't have a happy ending. But as I said earlier, I think being able to overcome adversities in the world and overcoming the indoctrination of institutions, in my case, such as the Catholic Church, that espouses certain things that we believe in. We're taught to believe in, but when you enter into the real world, it's not necessarily the way it's portrayed as it's presented to you. So you have to unravel all of that stuff. You have to, in order to get centered with yourself and to find your own level of homeostasis. So anyway, that's the answer to that question.
Thank you, Maurice. So actually a question came up which is related to the question I was going to ask you. Can you tell me about how you, first of all, we have a question from Steve, who said, how did you find an editor? Which is coupled with my question in terms of how you navigated finding an editor, then a publisher, and the process of working with each of those steps. What was that like?
Hell. I find that writing, it really is a very serious industry. There are a number of components to writing. I mean, it's the writing is one thing, the editing is something else, getting it published is something else, getting it marketed and promoted. All of those components go into the book. And I thought the hardest part would have been writing the book, but I have found the marketing and promotion of the book has been far more difficult for me than any of the other components. The editors, there's annually, until the COVID virus came about, there's a writers' conference, a wonderful one, actually, that was hosted at the University of Maryland's hotel, the Marriott, up on University Boulevard, not the one down at US Route 1. And it's called the Writers' Conference, and it's a group of professional writers who come together, who convene, and we're all in there networking. So you can find an editor that way, but you can also just go online and Google novel editors or editor. I mean, there's a variety of editors for a variety of different purposes. It's newspapers and technical reports and novels and biographies and a number of things. And so I found my publisher, which was Ex Libris, through the internet. And I published the entire book, marketed and advertised it through Ex Libris, which was kind of pricey in my opinion. But I never saw one human being in the process. And so the old traditional way of publishing books, I didn't take that route, traditional publishing. I did the self-publishing. And again, that was because of my age, because my career was over. I didn't have much time. I didn't want the rejection letters and the submission and resubmission. But there are a number of book publishers who will do the entire package for you. You have to get, I mean, it depends on the kind of exposure you want your book to have, whether you want it to have a Library of Congress number, whether you want to have it copyrighted, and a lot of you want to get it registered. So a number of the components to pulling all of these pieces together, I found for me better to just have one company who would handle all of that. But you can reduce the costs. I mean, to get your copyright yourself, all you have to do is write the copyright, go online and just go to the US Office of Patents and fill out the application to patent your document and send them a copy. Probably it cost you $150, $250. Whereas with my publisher, it was built in, so it was probably significantly more because I had to pay for the manpower to go do that part of the work. It was the same with the Library of Congress. It was the same with the editor, which is what that question was about. It's the same with finding the right publisher for you. So it's a lot of preparation you need to do really before you start writing or in between the process of writing in order to get all of the components together to get a finished product. And for me, it hasn't necessarily been easy, but the reward has been good. Now, the royalties are another thing. If you of course make more money if you do it all yourself and all of the money comes to you. Often when you're using publishers, they're taking out their labor costs. There's a process called print on demand. So print on demand is that each time, say, Kramer Books in our area or the University of Maryland bookstores or Amazon even buys 10, 15, 20, or 100 copies of my book, the publisher has to print those books. The alternative to that is it would be much, much cheaper if I had bought 5,000 or 6,000 copies of the books and stored them in my home, but then I would have to take the time to mail them, take them to the post office, which I have done because I have copies that I sell from my home because some people want autographed copies. And then, of course, there are book shows that you want to attend and workshops you want to attend. I've spoken at the Reginald Lewis Museum and Baltimore County Libraries, Baltimore City Libraries, DC Public Libraries. So you have to have a small warehouse of your own books. But I mean, for volume, it's a lot of work after you've written the book to get it out to the public. And I didn't want to spend my life running back and forth to the post office and paying the postage. But when you use a publisher, they take care of all of that but you're paying for it, thus your royalties are lower. So I know this is a long-winded answer. All of my answers are sort of long-winded, but anyway, that's the process. I just went online to do the whole thing, and I never saw one human being in the whole process. I never saw my editor, never saw the person who did the press release, never did. You can do your own website. You don't have to pay somebody, but I had somebody to do my website, but you need that in order to market and promote the book. So you need to have your own website. And again, you can create your own GoDaddy or some other platform, or you can have your publisher create one that's tailored specifically to your books and your writing. So there are just a lot of pieces to publishing the book, but it is rewarding at the end and a lot of kudos at the end. But I could have never made a good living writing.
Thank you, Maurice. You know, I do have one follow-up question, but I'll reserve it in case, you know, we have some time at the end. As a person of color, this is my last question. As a person of color navigating the publishing world, or the writing world, or the subjects that you've been trying to talk about, which is, you know, a gay Black man trying to navigate lots of different things. Do you have any advice or lessons learned for other writers or other people of color who are trying to think about writing as a form of self-expression, both, you know, in an academic or a non-academic platform?
Well, I would say, first of all, don't give up. I mean, I think it's a very rewarding career if the listeners are students and they're studying journalism or writing or English, and that's what they want to pursue. There are industries such as the newspapers, magazines, journalists, and even internet. There are a lot of internet sales and books now. And I would say, don't give up as being, you know, my first piece of advice. I would say question almost everything, because there are a number of scam artists in the industry. I can't tell you the number of phone calls I get each week. They say, you know, that your book has, you know, been reviewed and accepted, and, you know, you Google them. You know, when people call, just investigate to make sure that who you're working with is reputable. Look at the reviews from the Better Business Bureau to see if the company is reputable, because it's, unless you're selling hundreds of thousands of books, you're not making, I mean, if you make a few dollars off of one $15 book, you know, you have to sell a lot of books. So you want to make sure that you're being as efficient as possible with the money that you're investing and the time that you're investing in working with very reputable people. And I have found that checking with the Better Business Bureau and looking at the reviews of people that you're working with to make sure that they are not scam artists. And there are a ton of scam artists in this industry who take advantage for a fee, and they tell you that they're going to do internet marketing when all they're going to do is Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And sometimes you don't really know if they've done it or not, but you've sent them the money. You might see one ad or two ads some places, but and then there are other publishers who compete with other publishers. They want your business, and then they want you to redo your book with a new cover. They'll tell you that the price of your book is too expensive, and that you need to come with them. So there are a lot of persuasive people out there. But if you love what you're doing, and I really kind of wish I had started this earlier in my life, but I needed to make a living, and I wasn't confident then. And I've often heard from many writers going to writers' workshops and book signings and other groups where writers congregate, that before you start making money, you need to write about 5 books, because the royalties for each book will vary up and down. You have to have name recognition, or what they call branding, in the industry, so that people, when they're looking for your work, they can find you. Now, a mistake that I've made, according to professionals, is that I've written in two genres. My first book was a biography. My second book is more or less of a biography, but it's a true story. And my second book was a novel. So when you're developing your fan base, if you're noted as a biographer, they're looking for another biography, and they liked your work, they're looking for another biography that you have written. They're not looking that you've gone out in some other direction, writing a thriller or, you know, gay romance or love stories. I mean, so it's good, according to the professionals, to narrow your genre. And if you're going to be a romance writer, be a romance writer. If you're going to be a thriller writer, be a thriller writer, and then your name recognition, and then you have more repeat sales. So those would be a few of the things, but there's a ton more. Maybe in question and answers, I can come up with some more.
Well, thank you, Maurice. At this time, I'd like to open it up for questions. And anyone who has a question can just raise their hand by clicking on the icon in their name, in their screen, or can just type the questions to everyone in the chat. The first question we have here is from Tiffany Purvis. What will your next project be, and what topic would you want to explore?
Well, my next topic, I think probably one of the most colorful people in my entire life, in all of my years, has been my mother. And she used to have Black wives' tales and sayings and expressions that did not come from an educational foundation. My mother was not a college graduate. She attended college but didn't finish, and neither did my dad. But in raising her children, she had a lot of cliches and colloquialisms and expressions that she used to get her point across. Now, it may not have come out pretty and delicate and educated and sophisticated, but she got the point across. For an example, my mother would say, if somebody gave you as a child $5, you earned $5. My mother would say, if you make $1, save a cent. Well, what that translated to was, if you make $1 and you save the cent, that was 20%. And so my mother always encouraged saving in her children. She wanted them to save, but she didn't want them to save like 10%, which is what is a common figure of what you earn now. She wanted you to save 20%. And so those things educationally are called aphorisms. I mean, they're just sayings, and some of them, I don't know where she got them from or how she coined them, but she just would say all kinds of things. Or if you did something very well, she might say, well, I see you use your head for something besides a hat rack. So, I mean, what's a hat? You know, a hat rack in your head. You had to make these associations. So anyway, it's going to be a book of aphorisms, and I think it's going to be quite funny and quite hilarious.
So we have another question from Susan Martin. How has earning a PhD impacted your career path? Go back to 1980 when you were a doc student. What did you think you were going to do after finishing your PhD? Did you think you would write books?
I didn't think I would, but I'm gonna tell you, that is really a good question. I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, I'm going somewhere, but I don't know where I'm going. For me, education was a value in my family, and it was something that all three of my sister, my brother, and myself, we all went to school and we got an education. But it was also a life of survival. I didn't have the luxury of trying to sit down and figure out things, and I really wasn't the best student. But what I can say about my PhD after I got it and after I earned it in 1983, I really did not know what I was already employed in higher education, but I really had not found my place. I had not found my niche. And to make a gigantically long story short, when I was hired with the United States Department of Agriculture, it seemed like all of those miscellaneous jobs that I had, they weren't necessarily miscellaneous, but they were jobs that I wasn't in love with or enamored with. And when you introduced me and said that I worked in the public and private sector, I did. I worked in both areas, but sometimes I really didn't like my job. I mean, I could do the job. I always had nice performance appraisals. I got along well with people, but it just didn't fit. So when I finally got the job at USCA, it's all of those pieces sort of came together, but that did not occur until about 5 to 7 years after I got my degree. I didn't earn the degree with the specific purpose of being a college president or a dean or a director or being president of a foundation. I didn't have any of that career planning in my head when I got my doctorate. It was just that I was working in higher education. And I worked in Baltimore City Public Schools as well. And education was valued, and you earned more money with more credits. And so at that time, when I was in the more survival mode of trying to become self-sustaining, self-supporting, and independent, I did those jobs and I did them well, never got anything as low as satisfactory for performance appraisals. I always did a good job, but it wasn't until I finally landed a job in agriculture, which was the last place on earth I ever thought I would go. And actually it was a job that I was recruited for. So I think it's good to have a plan to sort of know what you want to do, but I was sort of a late bloomer and didn't know what I wanted to do, and wasn't familiar with the workforce, and my parents weren't college educated, so they couldn't guide me in terms of what to do. And so I was really on my own. And to me, that was a form of adversity, because I had an advisor at Maryland in undergraduate school in the College of Business who said to me, "You don't belong here. You need to go to a junior college." Well, see, if you don't have the mentoring, if you don't have advisement and training with teachers and professors who are going to help guide you and help structure your life, you're really working at a deficit. And in my case, I didn't have it at home, and I didn't find it necessarily in the institution. And then when I got to graduate school, I didn't have time, even if they were available, because I had to work in order to pay the tuition. My parents didn't pay for that, or either master's at Hopkins. But I was fortunate at Maryland with the Ph.D. because I did get a fellowship. And that's how I ended up. And I was tired, just exhausted, dead tired when I worked on my doctorate, because I had earned 2 master's degrees. And I did that because at the time they were saying that the market was flooded with PhDs. They didn't need any more PhDs. So I got 2 masters. So I would say have a plan if you have a plan, but I don't think everybody matures at the same time at the same place. But the PhD certainly did pay off, and it just paid off in spades. But it was about 6 or 7 years before I actually saw it pay off.
Thank you, Maurice. I just wanted to make a quick comment for everyone's edification that in the chat I put a link to a full story that was written about Maurice. And one of the things that, is a little known fact is that Maryland was the predominantly white institution, actually, until the 1950s, when Perrin Mitchell became the first African-American to get a master's degree in sociology by suing the state of Maryland to gain admission into the university. And then later, Maurice was part of a cohort of students recruited by Archie Buffkins, who was the associate dean of the graduate school at the time, for what is called the Other Race Fellowship, which Maurice, for you, I've actually looked into and have been researching since then to see what I could find out about it. But it was called the Other Race Fellowship for many, many years, even well into the 90s, and recruited students of color to the institution to study the doctorate for the, to complete a doctoral degree. So you were part of that group of folks who came
That's
at
correct.
that time. Yeah. So, and it was through that story that we met, and I became engrossed with your story and kind of following you and what you've been up to. So my next question to you is regarding the editor piece. How do you know if you have a good editor? Have you used the same editor for every single book? Or how do you know an editor is good? I mean, there's an editor that will literally stylize the writing to reflect their own selves in the piece, or they take a very sort of stand back approach and, you know, let you do all the creative stuff. What characterizes a good editor in your view?
Well, there are different types of editors I have learned. You have what's called a copy editor, and you can have a content editor. And I have found when working with editors, you have to tell them what it is you want. If you just want them to read it sort of like a spell check to make sure it reads grammatically correct. For example, in the community that I grew up in, people didn't speak proper English. I mean, they may have had ain't or something else written the way they talk. And if I'm characterizing that person in my book, I want it to be authentic the way I want it. So it may not be grammatically correct according to what American Standard English is, but I have to let the editor know, do not change that. Just edit it that it makes sense. And then you have what are called ghostwriters, and you can have content editors. And the content editor will look at the book to see if it actually makes sense chronologically, if the facts that you have in the book are accurate and authentic, and they will do more research. So you have to work with your editor. It's not like you just give them the manuscript and then they take a red pen and mark it up and then give it back to you. You have to more or less work with it. And even after they edit it, it's recommended that you read it again. And I'll tell you, if it's a struggle for you to write as it was for me in the beginning, you don't want to, it's like a doctoral dissertation or a master's thesis. You don't want to see it again. You want to get it out. You want to get rid of it. You don't want to reread it again. But you have, it's intense and you have to do that. And the quality is just to interview them and also to get a reference, if possible, of somebody else, and or get a listing of other books that they have edited or writings that they have edited, and see what others have said about them. And that's what I call reviews. And it's possible to find good ones and great ones, but I mean, I do think that you have to work with them. You can't just expect them to work magic without any input from you. And you do have to tell them what it is you want from them.
Thank you. Tiffany, do you want to ask your question directly that you asked in the chat? Would you mind?
Sure. Hi, Dr. Dorsey. So my question was, what do you wish someone would have told you about navigating career paths after graduation? There may be some students who are still facing adversity. And so what would be some advice that you would give to them about how to kind of navigate that world, or maybe what you wish you had have known coming out of school and getting into a career?
Well, I would say both at the undergraduate and graduate level, I would like to have had some career guidance, because I think for me and for middle class people, especially, unless you're born to wealth, are going to go to work somewhere. You're going to hopefully make a contribution. And I think that some type of counseling and guidance as to opportunities that you could have. When I was at the undergraduate school, they had the Shoemaker Hall. I suspect it's still there, I don't know. but they had a career counseling center. But again, I think you really need to have some idea of yourself and do some of those personality appraisements, personality type tests or career type tests to see the kind of person and personality. I think they call them Myers-Briggs in my generation, and types of tests like that to see where you would most likely fit in. Because I think sometimes our ambition, as well, it was the case of mine, it was that I was reaching higher than I felt like I had the talent and skill to do that particular job. I had to more or less start at an entry or middle level before you go up. And so I think more personal assessment, assessment of self, and kind of knowing where you fit in. And I would have liked a lot more of that, because when I graduated, it was like, take this piece of paper and you're done. You're on your own. And you spend a lot of time. I spent a lot of times changing careers. I changed jobs every year for about the first 4 or 5 years. Every year I changed jobs because I just couldn't find out where I wanted to be. And I think with some good advisements and good counseling, with advisors who cared about you. But when you get the comment that I got from one of my advisors, you need to go to a junior college, that just sort of deflates you. And then you're almost afraid to ask again. So, but anyway, if you ever want to talk to me, you can call me on my telephone. I'm at 202-332-2759. I'd happy to spend more time talking to any of you about my experiences. But I am glad that I went to Maryland, and I am a life member of the Alumni Association, and my bachelor's and my Ph.D. did pay off, and I feel like I got the better education from Maryland with all of its adversities.
We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
I do.
We have a question from Fushia Hoover. Her question is, do you wish you had started writing sooner?
I do. I really wish I had started writing sooner, and I really wish I had gotten more academic preparation in English and journalism. I mean, there's some mistakes that you make that if you were paying attention in maybe elementary or junior high or high school, or maybe even in college in your literature classes or your English classes or your journalism classes, that when you're in undergrad, you're more or less playing around and going to the sports and games and socializing and having your first taste of independence. But yes, I really do wish I had gotten more preparation before I started, because I think I could have saved time and I could have saved money. And I do think it's good to work with reputable professional people. And I think I would also go traditional publishing with my 4th book.
Maurice, can you please repeat your phone number again very slowly? Some folks are asking for it again. And then, and then I'll ask the last question from Tanya Bryant.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. My telephone number for those listening is area code 202-332-2759. That's my residence. And my cell phone is 202-422-2996. I am retired. I'm pretty flexible, happy to talk to you. And as you can probably tell, I'm a big talker and gregarious. But I do enjoy sharing what I've learned. And I love my age. I mean, I always thought when I got to be in my 70s, it was just going to be dreadful and I was going to be half dead. But it's like you come to a place where you have things that you want to share with people. So call me anytime. I'm more than happy to help and chat with any of you, or visit or have coffee like Anna and I do. And Anna, I want to thank you before you ask the last question, because you've just been so wonderful to me, and you make University of Maryland feel like home.
Well, I think we have a lot to make up for, Maurice, based on the experiences I heard you tell me. So I will ask the last question. Tanya, would you like to ask your question yourself?
Sure, that's fine.
That would
That's
be
fine.
great. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just wanted to know what resources, I'm a student of color, graduate of color and a member of the Black alumni at Maryland. So what resources were you able to access when you dealt with adversity related to being a part of a number of marginalized groups? And who was a part of your village?
You mean at the University of Maryland?
Yes, like when you were going through
Oh
dealing with
well,
adversity.
in undergraduate school, we had less than 10% of the total population there. And the university president at the time was President Elkins, and he looked at us at convocation and he says, look to the person to the right of you and the person to the left of you. And of the three of you, only one of you will graduate. So a number of the people who had come from, of color, who had come from New York and Baltimore and DC and a number of places across the country never made it through. I mean, part of it was academic, part of it was social, part of it was financial. So I had no village. I felt like I was on my own at the undergraduate level. At the graduate level, I still felt like I did not have a village per se, but not because the village wasn't present. It was just that at that stage and point in my life, I was working and I had to, pay a house note, a car note, and gasoline and clothes and go to work every day and go to school. So, and study. And it was hard to depend on the village. I mean, Anna has introduced me to the graduate school, and I have heard that their resources are available. But during the time that I was there for both degrees, people of color weren't really particularly welcome. They were tolerated. And that wasn't all. I mean, that wasn't always the case because I had a couple of lovely deans, and I joined Phi Delta Kappa, the University of Maryland chapter of Phi Delta Kappa. But the organizations that I joined and belonged to both during my educational process and after were predominantly the dominant group. There just were so few there. I mean, we're going back to 1964. I mean, most of you probably weren't even born at that point in time. So it was a different world. And so I can't say that there was a village that I had. I just felt like I was pretty much on my own. And I guess being the youngest of three children, and I was 7 years behind the oldest, I had to learn how to be on my own by myself most of the time anyway, because when I was born, they were 7. When I was 7, they were 14. When I was 14, they were gone. So it was no closeness there. So I just learned to be more or less independent. But I do think a village would help. And perhaps maybe my village was external to the campus, but in terms of internal to the campus, I didn't necessarily feel like I had a village personally at that point in time. I mean, I'm sure it's a lot different now, but at that time, I just didn't feel like I had a village. I hope that helps, I'm happy to elaborate more later, but that would be my answer to that question.
Yeah, I think it's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you, Maurice, for sharing your story. I think, as Archbishop Desmond Tutu once said, my humanity is bound up in yours, and we can only be human together. So, I'm so sorry you had that experience, when you were here. And I think the more that we can highlight these stories like yours, I think it's incredibly important. And so I'm really grateful that you did and that you were here with us today. I wanted to thank you again for your time and your expertise. A recording of this webinar will be sent to the email address that you all signed up to use for the webinar. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you at another event this week during Career Week. And again, thank you, Maurice, so very much. This ends our program, and I wish you all a very good day and a good week, and be healthy and please be safe. And we'll see you soon. Thank you again, everybody.
And thank you all for participating. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Maurice. No, thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.